was talking with a very thoughtful lawyer friend earlier in the Gen AI era about writing and AI. And their position was sort of the value add for me as a lawyer is that I provide like an edge. My writing has a tone to it that is persuasive and is punchier than another lawyer would make it, which makes me a more effective lawyer for my clients than the average lawyer. And I think that that's actually true in our current system, that if you have a lawyer who's a better writer or, has more lively language, they might appeal more to judges.
Yeah, I mean, it's another reminder that like the question really isn't, how is this technology good for the lawyers, right? It's like, how might it be good for the justice system? If there are like tremendous advances that can be made in medicine or neuroscience, I don't think we're going to hear doctors saying, but is this going to be bad for the doctors? Like, that's not how they enter that conversation. And shouldn't we be caring about the administration of justice? And if we care about the administration of justice, then the advantage that one lawyer's flowery language has kind of undermines that. Welcome to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law, your go-to podcast focused on exploring the transformative impact of artificial intelligence on the legal industry. We're your hosts, Bridget McCormack and Jen Leonard, and together we'll navigate the rapidly evolving landscape of artificial intelligence, uncovering the opportunities, addressing the risks, and imagining the future.
In each episode, we bring you insightful discussions about cutting-edge technologies, the latest trends, actionable strategies, case studies, and novel insights that help your organization imagine its own future.
Whether you're a legal professional, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about the future of law, this podcast is your gateway to understanding the profound changes AI will bring to the profession. Join us as we scale education and empower the legal community to thrive in an era of unprecedented innovation.
Welcome to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. I am your co-host, Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers, and thrilled as always to be joined by the fabulous Bridget McCormack, President and CEO of the American Arbitration Association. We record these podcasts every other week to try to help the legal profession keep pace with the relentless progress of artificial intelligence and connect the dots between what is happening in the broader tech landscape and the work that lawyers and legal professionals do throughout our profession. Every week, we have 3 different segments. We start with our AI aha moments. Those are the moments since our last recording that each of us has engaged with AI in ways that we find to be magical. And then we jump into a couple of definitions. There's a whole host of terms that we all need to become familiar with to understand AI and to process some of the information out there. So we'll share each episode 1 or 2 definitions that you might want to know about, and then we'll jump into a main topic. And for today, we are going to focus on the thought leadership as our main topic of 2 leaders, one in the broader tech landscape, Dario Amodei, who is the founder of Anthropic, who makes Claude AI interface, if you're familiar with Claude, and Adam Unikowsky, who is an appellate lawyer with Jenner and Block and who writes a fantastic Substack about the future of law and all of the issues that we're talking about. So if you do nothing else after today's podcast, be sure to subscribe to Adam's Substack. You'll learn a lot, and he is incredibly persuasive and smart and forward-thinking. We're going to dive into that. But first, we will start with our AI ahas. Mine is very quickly, Bridget, this is not actually my AI aha, but this is something that I learned from presenting to a group of law firm partners and asked them how they were using AI outside of their practice. And one of the partners shared that her father has dementia and that she frequently goes to the doctor's office with him, but that he is unable after the visit to recall what the doctor's instructions were. So she and her father started using the Otter AI app, which is a voice to text application. So you can talk into it and it will generate a transcript to have the doctor talk to her father's phone and generate a transcript so that he can later pull it up and remind himself what the doctor told him, or she has the ability to pull it up as well and share that information with him. So I thought that was a really interesting use case. Any AI ahas from you since our last recording?
Yeah, I love that. I don't think have dementia. And I feel like that's a good use case for me for certain things that I'm like, I know I'm going to want to think more about this later. And I don't have the time to like listen carefully right now. But producing a transcript with it would be a great idea. I had one this week that I'm not sure it like shows that much creativity on my part, but it's a reminder of all the different things that the technology is really useful for that I'm not sure where else I would have gone to for this kind of knowledge. We're building a new website at the AAA ICDR, and as you might imagine, some of the things that you maximized your website for historically, search engine optimization, or as they call it in that business, SEO, is perhaps becoming less and less relevant as people change their habits and start using generative AI tools over traditional search tools. And so there's like a new term. I think they just call it AIO instead of SEO. And it's not the same. The kinds of things that you would do to build a website that would be attractive to some of the frontier models so that they would ingest the material and understand it and be able to supply it then to people who were asking about things that you do. It calls for different ways of organizing information, different ways of using the ways you talk about what you do. And so I first of all wanted to understand the background of both. So I sort of wanted a framework, the way I might have, when I was a judge, if I had a case in a new area, I would go find a law review article or a treatise, like to sort of understand like the background against which I was going to then have to figure out this specific question. And I felt like I had to do that background like learning so that I could be a better participant in the team calls that we're having about this new site that we're building. So I first just did the traditional like tutor me, teach me about CO and AIO, and what historically that meant for people who were trying to build a website that could reach the people they were interested in reaching. And then I had it go ingest our website, our current website, and give me feedback about what changes could we make right now to make it a better site, even before we build a new one for search engine optimization. And it gave me like a really detailed list of very specific things, none of which are very hard to do. Things that we could do right now. And then I said, what would using the same website, what are the kinds of things you would do to increase it for AI optimization? And again, like a really specific detailed list. And it was just the best learning experience of a new area for me. Just not, we built a website at the Michigan Supreme Court, but I had like a team and I just kind of like looked at it now and again. Now I really want to know, how can we make sure that, people who want to resolve disputes and might not be able to, afford a lawyer or find their way to a lawyer can find their way to dispute resolution services like that. I really want to break through not just lawyers, but to the public. It was just a wonderful way to learn that we've seen over and over again. But the specific go ingest this website and give me feedback was pretty interesting, I thought.
I love that. And I'm grateful to you for giving me the language too of AIO, because I'm starting to hear conversations about marketing to the AI, because we're going to be engaging with information differently than we have. And so I haven't yet had the language to sort of talk about AI optimization.
Yeah,
because SEO is search engine optimization. So that's for a Google-based world, right?
Exactly. Sorry, maybe I should have like spelled that out. But yeah, if you're Googling, SEO is what is the whole ball game. But if you're not anymore, you really want to figure out how to make sure that your content is understood by these like frontier generative AI models so that they can feed it back to people who are looking for the kinds of things that you do. So that was super interesting. Just again, a reminder that it's just a fantastic tutor for some new area that you have to learn and you feel like you have to learn kind of quickly.
Yeah.
Very, very.
It also seems, and we had another episode on solos and small firms, like a place where they could really maximize the investment of their resources in thinking about how to market their services.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for entrepreneurs and small businesses, I think it's again another game changer.
Totally.
So definitions, section 2, and I think today we're going to start with something that's very topical: chatbots versus computer use. Right now, Claude is the only model that has a computer use function, and it's a beta function. But do you want to explain either what we mean by chatbots or both, Jen? I can jump in if useful.
Yeah, so please jump in and help me because I'm just starting to understand the second piece. Chatbots are probably familiar to both most people listening. Chatbots are an interface where we ask a question of the AI and the AI responds to us. So these are not new with generative AI. We've been using chatbots on customer support websites when they've been terrible for until generative AI for the most part. But ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, they're all chatbot based interfaces. And lawyers are also using chatbot based interfaces in their firms or their practices as they're testing new tools. And it's a familiar interface, which I think is what makes generative AI so adoptable. But I think it's important for lawyers and myself really to understand that this is just one way of engaging with artificial intelligence. And we're already starting to see a new wave of interfaces that will increasingly be infused into our physical environments, which is also why I think AI will be more transformative ultimately than the internet, which we sort of have been engaging with in a two-dimensional way since its inception. It's gotten stronger, but we continue to be limited to our devices in using it. But we're seeing already some new offerings. The first from Claude, and I believe Google announced before the end of the year that they'll have an offering. But Bridget, could you tell us about computer use? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I will say that I tried to figure out if I had access to this new way of using Anthropic's Claude, and I don't seem to, and it doesn't sound like I just couldn't find it. I think only certain users do at this point. Like you, I assume you read Ethan Mollick's piece. He had access to it early. He always gets access to the newest tools, and I read his piece on this, and so as always, my knowledge is coming from Ethan Mollick, sort of just recycling it for our listeners. But this new way of interacting with the technology is where the frontier model takes over your computer and carries out a task that you ask it to carry out, and that might mean it has to do some research. It has to go, looking for information across different websites, or around the internet to figure out what it needs to know to take the action you've asked it to take. But the idea is it can then do something independently based on that. However many steps it's needed to learn what it needs to do. I think in Ethan's case, he had it build a computer game. And I think the idea is this is where we're headed with asking it to buy you an airplane ticket or, make a reservation at a hotel. Those are probably pretty simple asks of it because I think there's the folks who code for a living are going to have much more use cases for this. And I saw over the weekend that Google is working on the same thing and will release it by the end of the year. And I also read that OpenAI, of course, is also working on it. And I assume this is just the first step to agents, which we've been talking a little bit about and others have been talking about. Is that about how you understand what the computer use interface is?
I think so. I've been trying to sort of wrap my head around what it will mean when AI is inside of our computer systems. And I think you're right. We talked on another episode about agentism, which is, there's no clear definition for some of these things, but it's basically the idea of AI acting on your behalf without needing your direction at every step. And I've been thinking about ChatGPT as agentic in some form now because unlike at the beginning, it now goes out to the internet and does searches and comes back with information without me telling it where to go. But this is, like you said, another level of just giving it an overarching goal and stepping away. I think in Ethan's case, he talked about like stepping away from the computer and it's going to take a while and you come back
Yeah.
and it's still working. It's still moving through the steps, but it's not asking you for feedback. And I think in his case, he had to redirect it a couple times, but it didn't come back and ask, should I now do this? Would you like me to do this? So I'm still trying to wrap my head around what the implications are. And, we take a very optimistic view, but it's also a little bit wild to have AI unleashed inside your computer or your browser and have it do things without your engagement. But it does seem to be the next frontier, so to speak, of using these systems.
And I think once you have that capability in your, in your phone, that's when adoption just grows tremendously, right? If you can, ask your phone to monitor the Delta flights to wherever and let you know when there's a seat or let you know, if there's a chance to get on an earlier flight. Who's not going to do that, right? I mean,
Right.
at least it's hard to imagine. So
I think that's also why, and this is outside the scope of our conversation, but people are sort of down on Apple right now because they have not sort of lit the world on fire with their AI offerings yet. I think they're making a smart play that when these systems become a little bit more refined and are then integrated into something that everybody has in their pockets, they will leapfrog over some of their competition in sort of owning the AI space because it will be seamless as Apple products are. And like you said, I could see it doing all sorts of really useful things without you needing to direct it on your phone.
which is Apple's way, right? I mean, they always kind of let other big tech companies go first and they let them make mistakes and they wait until it's, all the rough edges are smoothed out and then they deploy it in this like really user-friendly, easy to use kind of way. But one of the things I read in one of the comments about this new computer use function is apps won't matter anymore because, if your computer is the one trying to find its way between different apps to take the steps it needs to do whatever it is it's trying to do for you. It doesn't really care if, about their interface. It doesn't care if they're pretty. It doesn't care, if they are super easy to use. It just wants to like get its work done. So that'll be really interesting if it really downgrades the app market. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I read one commentator saying that.
I could see that. And it's funny, right? Like we've only had apps on a phone for 15 years or so, but it feels like that's the way it has to be. Just like Google has to be the way that you optimize for people getting to your website. And it does seem like in the next couple of years, the things that we thought were sort of canonical about using technology are going to shift really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a great segue to shifting really quickly. It's a great segue to Dario Amodei's essay, which I don't know if you or I saw it first, but I know we both texted each other pretty quickly, like maybe in the late at night, saying, "Oh wow, this we have to read this, and we probably have to talk about it." So why don't you get us into the conversation? Who is Dario Amodei? Why do we care what he had to say in an essay about the future of AI and what was the essay kind of about? And then we can get into some of the specifics.
Sure. So you absolutely get the credit for drawing my attention to this first. You texted me late at night and said you have to read this from Dario. And we have sort of been following Dario Amodei for a while in the class that we taught and in understanding the AI landscape. So there are so many people you hear about: Elon Musk, Sam Altman. Depending on how deeply you follow AI, you'll hear all these different names, and they all write and have thoughts about things. Dario Amodei, to me, stands out as somebody who is particularly thoughtful and particularly almost hyper educated around some of the foundational topics that were used to build artificial intelligence on neural networks. So he is the former vice president of research at OpenAI. He and some others left OpenAI to build Anthropic, which is the company that makes Claude, a AI interface that you and I use really frequently, especially for writing. He has a really deep background in physics and in human neuroscience. So he has advanced degrees, terminal degrees from Caltech, Stanford, Princeton, Stanford School of Medicine. He is a very, very intelligent, well-educated expert on physics and the way that the human mind works. And he's also worked in almost every major AI company, tech company in the world, including Baidu, which is the leading tech company in China, Google, OpenAI, and now Anthropic. And he is a trusted source, not only on the development of the technology and how it mimics the human mind, but also on the dangers of AI. And I think that that's, to me, why he stands out among the leaders in tech development. He is very concerned about some of the risks of generative AI on a society-wide scale, which is one of the reasons he formed Anthropic to develop responsible AI. And he's testified before Congress about the dangers of AI. And you'll remember that moment last fall when the board of directors of OpenAI fired Sam Altman briefly before he was reinstated. And many suspect that it was because they were concerned that Sam was moving too quickly and recklessly in developing powerful AI. And they really wanted Dario to come lead OpenAI, and they reached out to him and he declined. But he's a very, very important person in the AI landscape and a very thoughtful and smart person. And so he recently wrote a piece, a really long piece, I think it's like 15,000 words, called Machines of Loving Grace, which is a title that I sort of laughed at when I first read it. It sounds sort of robotic, but it comes from a poem about what if we could live in a world where we coexisted in harmony with machines as humans. And so I think he wrote the piece because he's developed a reputation for being a bit of an AI doomer. And Kevin Roose of the New York Times last year wrote a profile about Anthropic and said it's like the place of AI doomerism, that it's the reverse of what you would think Silicon Valley mindset would be, that they're really concerned about what they're developing. And so he wanted to write a piece that said all the things that he thinks are possible in a positive light because of powerful AI, and make the point and underscore the point that AI has to be responsibly developed and thoughtfully shaped, or we will not be able to achieve these positive ends, which is why he is so concerned about the risks. So just a few points from Amodei's essay. He talks about, we've talked about artificial general intelligence on this show, which is the term most leaders in the tech community use for an ill-defined point at which AI becomes better than most humans at most economically important tasks. He says he prefers the term powerful AI. So throughout the essay, he talks about powerful AI. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Bridget, he defines powerful AI as a point at which AI performs at a level that's above Nobel Prize winners across all disciplines, right? That's how I understood his definition to be.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I found that actually fascinating because above Nobel Prize winners in every discipline is pretty powerful. So
That's
yeah,
pretty smart.
yeah,
That's pretty smart.
yeah.
So above Nobel Prize winner level at all disciplines in a sort of collection of technologies. And he and others believe that we are really going to reach this point sooner than most predicted because of the accelerating advancement of AI, likely in the next few years. And you can debate the timelines. But the point of his essay is he postulates that when we reach this point, we have the capacity of driving 100 years worth of progress on a host of different activities in the span of 5 to 10 years because of the extreme capabilities of these machines. And one thing I want to call out before I go through the focus areas that I thought was interesting as somebody who is really fascinated by human creativity, he makes the point that one of the major limitations at breakthroughs on a variety of fronts in the human landscape is not our intelligence, but our ability to be creative with the intelligence that we have and draw connections across things that might not be so obvious. And one of the reasons he's hopeful that we'll make progress so quickly with artificial intelligence is that it can be more creative and find different connections faster than we can, which I think is interesting, both because I love creativity, but also because one of the myths about AI is that it will never replace our creativity and our ability to be creative, when in fact it might actually be more creative than we are and therefore more capable of unlocking new value.
Yeah, I found that I found this that particular take so really interesting, and he has great examples of how humans had the ability to make some of the breakthroughs that we've made decades before we made them, and it was really just not enough time to think of every creative different way of thinking about a particular problem. It just took humans took it 2 decades longer than it would have if an unlimited number of machines were doing the same work. So it makes a lot of logical sense to me, but wasn't a way I had thought about the progress having such an impact that he really convinced me of.
It's funny too. I've been listening to the audiobook of Sapiens by Yuval Harari, walking back and forth with my son to school. And this morning he was talking about the invention of the steam engine and how long, I think it might have been, over a century between recognizing that steam had the capacity to like set off tea kettles and pop lids off of pots, and it was just an annoyance, for humans to realize that that ability for steam to make things move could actually make products move, could make people move. And it made me think of Dario's essay, like an AI might have been able to figure that out the day that it was asked to do it, right? And so it
Yeah.
underscores the point of how much progress we can make because of creativity.
So he addresses 5 different areas where he thinks we could see significant positive change in this, what might be a very short timeline, extremely short timeline. And I know they're all fascinating. First of all, just go read the essay. Don't only listen to us. Go read it. It's worth it. But walk us through a little bit of what those were and where you were drawn to, or what you were mostly focused on.
Yeah. So, given his background in neuroscience and medicine, not surprisingly, he is really interested in AI's applications in science. And so he starts the essay in talking about the potential advancements in biology and physical health and some of the ways that AI can help us conquer and defeat illnesses, diseases, some of the things that we've struggled with for a really long time. He mentions Alzheimer's in particular as a condition that we could potentially defeat in the not so distant future. And coupled with that, he talks about neuroscience and mental health. And he has the most to say about these two topics because of his deep expertise. And he forecasts that we have the capacity possibly to solve many of the conditions that we think are chronic conditions physically, to potentially eradicate things like anxiety and depression, which is mind-blowing to me, because we'll have a greater ability to actually understand the physical roots of mental health and tackle them more effectively, all of which will have benefits that redound throughout society that we could spend weeks thinking about. But he talks about how the main limitations on the advancements there are the physical limitations in our world, things like vaccine trials and the need for time to do certain things, but that the AI itself will not be the limiting factor. It will be other physical and logistical limitations on those things. But he also makes the prediction that we could reach a place of what he calls escape velocity for people who are middle-aged, that we might be able to live to be 150 years old. Those of us who are currently middle-aged. I was not that excited about this part of this. I don't want to live to be 150, but I guess if that's your goal, He thinks that could be possible with the advancements that we'll make in AI in the next few years. So I was most grateful to him for this part because it's the part I least understand and the part where he's most expert. He acknowledges in the final three parts that he has less expertise here, but also optimism that we could have advancements in the following three areas: in economic development and the eradication or mitigation of poverty, both in our own country, in the US, and around the world. Fourth, in peace and governance. And we'll dive more deeply into that about the legal system and the things that he says about that. And fifth, the part that is the least well sketched out, that he concedes he doesn't have the most answers for, but the future of work and meaning, the possibility that we could find more meaning and more meaningful work in our future. I think this is the part I worry about the most, frankly, is what the future of work will look like for people. But he gets us started with some optimistic visions for how we could live more meaningful lives. And some of that is just a combination of the first four factors coming together. So he's optimistic in his essay. He wanted to make clear that this is the reason he does the work that he does, because he believes we can unlock these advancements, but that there are so many challenges, mostly human, social, and political, that could prevent us from achieving these goals, which is why he wanted to write the essay so that we can start being more thoughtful as a society. He also talks about the need for international collaboration and trying to have countries that are liberal democracies really drive the shaping of this technology to ensure that illiberal regimes are not the ones who win out in determining how to use AI, which has created some controversy, some feedback that would escalate an arms race or promote international conflict. But it, again, is really all about AI safety and responsibility and aligning the AI, which he believes will be very powerful soon, with human values. And so what we wanted to dig more deeply onto and connect with another leading thinker in our profession, another one that you have drawn my attention to, is his portion on judicial systems. And because we wanted to set the stage well for the second part of the conversation, we are actually going to read from the essay a couple of parts that we think are particularly important for lawyers. So I'll start with the part that stood out to me, Bridget. Dario writes in his section on peace and governance, for example, could AI improve our legal and judicial system by making decisions and processes more impartial? Today, people mostly worry in legal or judicial contexts that AI systems will be a cause of discrimination. And these worries are important and need to be defended against. At the same time, the vitality of democracy depends on harnessing new technologies to improve democratic institutions, not just responding to risks. A truly mature and successful implementation of AI has the potential to reduce bias and be fairer for everyone. And Bridget, I know there was a part of his essay, given your background as an appellate judge, that stood out to you as particularly interesting for lawyers and judges.
Yeah, and I'm going to read it in just one second. But right before he correctly, in my view, references the inherently subjective nature of decision making by judges and arbitrators and anyone who's making decisions in a legal context, because so often the standard by which the decision has to be made is infused with a really subjective term. Like, he uses cruel and unusual punishment, but I thought of all the times in which reasonableness was part of some standard. And, reasonableness is just inherently squishy. What's reasonable to me might be not that reasonable to you. And smart, well-meaning people with different priors about a particular subject can genuinely have different understandings of what that means. And so it always felt like bias, in the way that we all have bias, just human bias, right? Inherent bias is just part of judicial decision making. But here's the part that I'm going to read from. So bear with me, but I think it's the part that made me quickly send the piece to everybody I work with. But He says, I am not suggesting that we literally replace judges with AI systems, but the combination of impartiality with the ability to understand and process messy, real world situations feels like it should have some serious positive applications to law and justice. At the very least, such systems could work alongside humans as an aid to decision making. Transparency would be important in any such system, and a mature science of AI could conceivably provide it. The training process for such systems could be extensively studied, and advanced interpretability techniques could be used to see inside the final model and assess it for hidden biases in a way that is simply not possible with humans. Such AI tools could also be used to monitor for violations of fundamental rights in a judicial or police context, making constitutions more self enforcing. And that's, to me, one of the great promises of this technology in the context of the rule of law, right? To the extent that it can bring more rigorous and also more understandable processes to bear, I feel like it really has the potential to grow public confidence in judicial or arbitrator decision making. And so this particular paragraph definitely jumped out at me as worth paying some attention to.
Yeah, and even before we got the chance to work together, I remember years ago we did a podcast where we both talked about, what happens when the technology available to us is used only in the private sector for legal purposes, and the public sector and courts don't get to take advantage. This was pre-Gen AI we had this conversation. And what would
Yeah.
that do to the stability of our democracy if people have less and less confidence? They already have low confidence in the legal system and the judicial system. And so we were both really taken with this and the opportunities it really creates. And we're going to turn in a second to Adam Unikowsky's piece. But we were talking before the podcast about this idea. This is the biggest thing that people raise when I talk about AI, which is AI is biased. It's flawed. We can't trust it. It's not that I disagree with that, but I'm amazed at how much we trust human beings who are deeply flawed and deeply biased to interpret, as you said, these really subjective terms that have real. I mean, even if you just think about the studies about criminal sentences before and after lunch, that are famous. I'm sort of amazed at how unwilling people are to consider a world in which AI could be less biased than human beings are.
I mean, and not only less biased, but the ability to be able to see what it's done and then study it, right, across many decisions is just not access that we could ever have to humans who are making those kinds of decisions. So, this to me is very exciting. The tools that it might bring to bear on a pretty important, the most important operating system in our society. So I'm excited about this, and it does connect to some of Adam Unikowsky's work, and in particular his most recent piece. Well, it's not his most recent piece; it's his most recent AI piece on criminal sentencing. Actually, Adam writes about all kinds of interesting things, and follow his Substack, please. He's really, really worth following. But Adam is an appellate lawyer at Jenner who's argued in the U.S. Supreme Court many times. He clerked on the U.S. Supreme Court. He's a very talented, very, very smart lawyer who also has a technology background. I forget what he has, some kind of advanced degree in some technology, and I forget what it is, but he's definitely more of a technologist than I am. That's for sure. So he has kind of embraced this new technology in a way that we don't always see totally across the legal profession, especially not maybe in his little area of it, which is very litigation focused, and lawyers who are working on the kinds of appeals Adam is working on are really talented writers, right, and talented oral arguments, and the humans always feel like a very important part of the appellate lawyering story, or at least always have to me as a former appellate judge. I should say Adam did argue before me once when I was on the Michigan Supreme Court. He reminded me of that. I didn't know that. I didn't remember it. But I did look back on the case and I agreed with his position. But anyway, in this piece, which I encourage everybody to look at, he does a great study using an 11th Circuit case that was about a criminal sentencing enhancement. The case is United States versus De Leon. And in this particular case, the defendant, De Leon, was convicted of armed robbery, and he was sentenced with an enhancement for, and I quote, physically restraining the victim. The sentencing guidelines allowed the trial judge to enhance a defendant's sentence if the defendant had physically restrained the victim. And in his case, there was no dispute that he held the victim at gunpoint, and the victim did not try and get away. He could not move. But as you might imagine, the term physically restrained might mean lots of different things. It turns out to be an ambiguous term applied in a case like this. So Adam, who's done these other experiments using generative AI and only frontier models, he uses Claude Sonnet. That's his favorite model. I know I'm sure he has access to the legal tools as well, but that's what he's using for these experiments that he writes about, which is fascinating, I think. And he decided to use this case and sort of see what Claude could do with this particular legal question. I should say that, and Adam will say and has said that, the legal question here is it's not complex, right? It's one question. It is one where there is limited precedent. I think in the 11th Circuit, there were 3 cases that the judges were going to have to follow. But it wasn't the kind of case where there was lots of other authority that's hard to kind of manage and even organize. So it's a sort of simple question, but the kind of question that appellate courts come out in different ways all the time on. In fact, there's a circuit split around this question. What does this mean? So Adam makes a series of arguments in the piece, and I can summarize them like this. If generative AI were used when the sentencing enhancement was drafted, we might not be here. We'd have far less disputes because generative AI can resolve an ambiguity at the front end, and he showed how that would work. In this particular case, he asked Claude to identify where this particular sentencing enhancement language might cause there to be some ambiguity in hard cases, and then also to address how somebody writing the sentencing enhancement could clarify it to eliminate that ambiguity. And that was that's, if you only read that much, it's fascinating. He sort of makes the point, why wouldn't you do that with every regulation, every statute? Let's get rid of all of the litigation around crappily drafted statutes, which I feel like is a lot of litigation as somebody who decided a lot of questions around crappily drafted statutes. But then he says, let's see what else Claude can do. So he decided to ask Claude to write the opening brief in this particular case. He gave it a substantial prompt, but not that substantial because it's a pretty straightforward question. Again, he did give it the three cases that the 11th Circuit had decided on this issue previously. He told it to be concise. He told it was really important that it not hallucinate because this is important litigation, which is hilarious that it actually behaves better if you remind it not to hallucinate. And then asked it to draft the opening brief, and he then shows you, the reader, what that product looks like, and he compares it to the actual brief that Mr. De Leon's lawyer filed on his or her behalf. I should say, as you probably know, in many criminal appeals, people have a right to counsel, and so different jurisdictions meet that need in different ways, but there are, in many criminal appeals, lawyers are assigned to represent people, and they are often, juggling many cases and don't have the kind of time to put into one case that I think Adam would readily admit his partners at Generative to put into one case. In his view, and frankly in mine, Claude's version of this brief was superior to the actual brief that was filed. It was just clearer. It could have been, probably punchier. Adam himself says I probably could have made the intro punchier, and I'm sure he could have, because he's really good at this. But it was just very straightforward, very clear, and it made the very best argument. He then, of course, where this is going, had it do the same thing with the government's response brief and did a compare and contrast there, and agreed that again, Claude was superior to the brief that was actually filed by the government. And again, to be fair to the government, they're managing many cases, and the lawyers handling these cases are very often overwhelmed with the amount of work they have to do. He then had it write an en banc petition, because I think one of the judges in the actual opinion in a concurrence said, that we have to decide this case this way, but really the circuit should take it up en banc and figure it out, because it's a bit of a mess. And he had it write an en banc petition, and again, it did a tremendous job. So that has really important, I think, implications for the administration of justice, both in the upstream way, if we were able to identify ambiguities in regulations and statutes and in sentencing guidelines before we had to have a bunch of litigation around it. We could save lawyers and judges time for the harder questions that need humans to decide them. But also, if we could figure out a way to help overburdened court systems and overburdened public defender offices and government offices, just to get to better answers more quickly, that also would be a tremendous advantage. But I've been talking a lot. What were your reactions, or some of your reactions, Jen, to Adam's piece?
No, I loved it. And my initial reaction after reading the whole thing was, I'm going to bookmark it and send it to all my lawyer friends who argue that AI is not as capable at doing the kind of work that they do, because he's so persuasive and so thoughtful in outlining exactly how he used it, but also a framework for thinking about how to use AI in different contexts. And one area where I wasn't really thinking about the use of AI in practice was for legislative attorneys. And when I worked for the city of Philadelphia, some of our most thoughtful attorneys were our legislative attorneys, and they would spend weeks, debating, including a word or another word and what it might mean and what the downstream implications, unintended effects might mean of using this phrase. And imagine just the process of speeding that up by adding a prompt, like, what are some of the unintended downstream effects of this language? You could save weeks and a lot of taxpayer resources, frankly, to be able to do other things. I also wanted to note, I'm not sure whether we did, but that in the De Leon case, Judge Newsom, whom we've talked about before, also wrote a concurrence, because he has been experimenting with AI, where he advocates for what Adam's talking about, using AI to resolve inherently subjective language and provide greater clarity. I thought one sentence that Adam wrote was really funny, and I'll quote it here. He wrote, with essentially no guidance, AI can draft briefs that are better than the briefs drafted by the human lawyers in this case. This isn't intended as a criticism of the human lawyers whose briefs were fine. It's just hard to compete with AI, which made me laugh, because all of the arguments that I hear now are the opposite. Like, AI cannot compete with us. So to hear him say it like that made me giggle a little bit. And then he makes the point that, again, to the legislative attorneys or rulemakers, anybody who's drafting regulations or laws, should run their language through AI to detect potential ambiguity. And then he says, why not do this? If you're the drafter of the document and you don't want to follow the suggestions, then just don't. And I loved that point. We're not saying we're handing this over to the AI to do. It sort of echoes Dario's point of I'm not suggesting we literally replace judges. I'm just saying that we could use this as a really helpful tool. And what else? I thought that it was nice that he listed, and I don't have them delineated here, but he listed criteria that we could use, including things like a low complexity case where there is a split to sort of decide which cases we would apply AI to in an appellate context.
So he makes one other point that I love, which is he's like, and if you're worried that a particular dispute might not be a great one for AI because it might be too complex, or it might just have some nuance that you think the AI won't appreciate, you can just ask the AI whether it can do a good job. And he shows how he does that, and like how the AI helps line draw about what it thinks it can do well and what it thinks it probably is not the best bet for, which is hilarious.
And I was about to make a similar point, which is I love that he told the AI, as you said, don't hallucinate. This is a really important case and you cannot hallucinate. And that's the other biggest fear that lawyers have because of the ChatGPT lawyer story. And I think all of us are getting, adjusted to the idea that you can actually ask the AI, not to do something, or how can I use you? How can you help me? And where won't you be good?
Yeah.
The last thing that I'll say is this final piece resonated with me because I was talking with a very thoughtful lawyer friend earlier in the Gen AI era about writing and AI, and their position was sort of the value add for me as a lawyer is that I provide like an edge. My writing has a tone to it that is persuasive and sort of to Adam's point is punchier than another lawyer would make it, which makes me a more effective lawyer for my clients than the average lawyer. And I think that that's actually true in our current system, that if you have a lawyer who's a better writer or, has more lively language, they might appeal more to judges, pardon the pun. But I thought he ended his piece by saying, if there's a set of cases in which a lawyer's flowery language persuades the court to grant rehearing en banc, but wooden language would have failed, that strikes me as a failure rather than a success of the criminal justice system. And if those cases don't exist, if the en banc court is in every case disciplined enough to set aside stylish rhetoric, then why not have Claude write the petition in 20 seconds? And I just loved that summation of something that I have been thinking but could not put into these kinds of words. It's the perfect argument for why we shouldn't be proud of our flowery language winning the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's another reminder that like the question really isn't, how is this technology good for the lawyers, right? It's like, how might it be good for the justice system? I mean, if there are like tremendous advances that can be made in medicine or neuroscience, I don't think we're going to hear doctors saying, but is this going to be bad for the doctors? Like, that's just not the frame, where that's not how they enter that conversation. And I think Adam's example here is the same. Like, shouldn't we be caring about the administration of justice? And if we care about the administration of justice, then the advantage that one lawyer's flowery language has kind of undermines that.
So this has been one of my favorite conversations about AI because of the connections between three really brilliant thinkers, including you, Bridget, for bringing them all together, of Dario and Adam, and you drawing my attention to both of these. So I really liked the switch of a lot of the mindsets and a lot of the arguments that I hear and turning them on their head through the voice of a very talented appellate lawyer. So thank you to Adam, and everybody should subscribe to his Substack. Thank you to Dario Amodei, who probably won't hear this podcast, but we're grateful that there is a leader thinking critically and thoughtfully about how we might shape a better future using AI. And thank you always to you, Bridget, for surfacing this great content and giving us the chance to talk about it.
Oh, no, it was great. This was a really fun conversation.
Well, thank you to everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.